Have you ever had your own mother introduce your husband as Donna's friend at a family dinner while he was wearing his wedding ring? I have. Christmas Eve, 3 years ago. 30 guests in my mother's dining room. A 10-foot tree blinking silver and gold behind me. A manila envelope in my hands. And my mother's face, shifting from confusion to recognition to something I'd never seen on her before. Panic. 3 of her closest friends were sitting at that table. Women she'd spent decades impressing. Women who'd bought furniture from my sister-in-law, furniture they were about to learn was stolen. Copied from the hands of the man my mother had spent 8 years calling the yard guy. That Christmas Eve destroyed a lot of things. Relationships. Reputations. A marriage that wasn't mine. But it also built something that couldn't be destroyed. Something my mother had spent a decade trying to pretend didn't exist. My name is Donna Hartley. I'm 31 years old now. I live on a piece of land my mother once called a waste of good dirt. My husband builds furniture that people fly across the country to commission. And my mother, the woman who once told me I was throwing my life away, left me a voicemail 6 months ago that I've listened to 11 times. But to understand any of that, I need to take you back 8 years. To the first time my mother saw Carlos's hands. She looked at them the way you'd look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. The Hartleys of Charlotte, North Carolina looked exactly like the family you'd see in a magazine ad for home insurance. Big house, trimmed hedges, 2 luxury cars in a 3-car garage. My mother, Patricia, made sure of that. She'd spent 30 years in real estate, not just selling houses but performing wealth. Every room in her home was staged, fresh flowers on the entryway table every Monday, throw pillows rotated by season, the kind of house where you were afraid to sit on the couch. My father, Gene, was a retired accountant. Quiet man. Gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd spent 35 years nodding at whatever Patricia said, and by the time I was grown, I think he'd forgotten he had his own opinions. When Patricia decided something, it was decided. Gene's job was to sign the check and stay out of the way. My older brother, Mitchell, was the golden child. Commercial real estate, sharp suits, the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He married Vanessa Keller, an interior designer with a taste for champagne and a voice that carried across any room. Together, they were everything Patricia wanted her family to represent. Polished, successful, expensive. And then there was me. Donna. The disappointment. I dropped out of my business degree at 21 to work at a garden center outside Charlotte. Patricia told her friends I was finding myself, which was her way of saying I'd failed. That's where I met Carlos Medina. He was 25, Mexican-American, grew up working class in Raleigh. His father drove a delivery truck. His mother cleaned offices. Carlos ran a small landscaping crew during the day, 4 guys, 2 trucks, residential lawns. But every night, he drove to a rented garage on the east side of town and built furniture by hand. He'd taught himself from library books and YouTube videos, starting with a wobbly bookshelf made of pallet wood and working his way up to pieces that made you stop and stare. Reclaimed barn wood. Second-hand tools he'd sharpened himself. A space heater in winter because the garage had no heat. The first time I brought him to my mother's house for Sunday dinner, I watched Patricia's eyes land on his hands before anything else. His knuckles were calloused, the skin rough and cracked at the fingertips. Sawdust sat in the creases no matter how hard he scrubbed, ground into the whorls of his fingerprints like a permanent watermark. He'd placed those hands on her white linen tablecloth, next to her polished silverware and her crystal water glasses, and I saw her flinch. It was quick, just a flicker, but I caught it. Like he'd set a pair of muddy work boots on her dining table. Mitchell shook his hand and looked at the calluses the way you'd examine a rash. Vanessa leaned into Mitchell and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "At least he cleaned up." Carlos smiled through all of it. He complimented the food, asked Gene about his garden, thanked Patricia for having him. He was gracious in a room that didn't deserve it. 3 months later, I told the family we were engaged. Sunday dinner. Patricia set her fork down slowly, looked at Carlos across the table, then back at me. Donna, I'm not paying for a wedding to a man who mows lawns for a living. If you want to throw your life away, you can do it without my checkbook. The table went silent. Jean stared at his plate. Mitchell smirked into his wine glass. Vanessa studied her manicure. Carlos stood up. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Hartley. He walked out the front door. Didn't slam it. Just closed it behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than a shout. I found him in the car. Engine off. Hands on the wheel, knuckles white. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Carlos, staring straight ahead, I'll never be what she wants for you. Good, I said. I don't want what she wants for me. We got married 6 weeks later. 22 guests. A backyard ceremony at his friend's property outside Raleigh, a half-acre of uncut grass bordered by pine trees, mason jars with candles lining the aisle, fireflies blinking in the tall grass like the earth was winking at us. A playlist ran off a Bluetooth speaker propped on a folding chair. Carlos wore a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. I wore a dress I bought off a clearance rack for $60. The officiant was a friend from the garden center. We wrote our own vows. Mine were 2 long. His were 3 sentences. I will build you a life with my hands. I will never ask you to be smaller. And I will love you even when your mother doesn't. No one from my family sat in the front row. Jean sent a card with a check for $200. Patricia sent nothing. And that's when my mother started erasing me. Slowly at first. Then all at once. The exclusion didn't come as a single blow. It came in cuts, small enough to question, frequent enough to bleed. Christmas, our 2nd year married. Carlos and I drove 2 hours to Charlotte. We walked into Patricia's house carrying wine and a gift, a hand-carved jewelry box Carlos had made for her from cherry wood, the grain polished to a glow. Patricia glanced at it, said, "That's nice," and set it on the counter behind a stack of napkins. Then I saw the photograph. Framed, sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. A family portrait. Mitchell and Vanessa on the left, Patricia and Jean on the right. Studio lighting, matching outfits. No Donna. No Carlos. Oh, Patricia said when she noticed me looking. We took that last week. You weren't available. We hadn't been asked. I picked up the frame. Held it so Patricia could see it. Where am I in this, Mom? Her mouth opened. Closed. She smoothed her skirt and said, "Donna, don't make a scene." I set the frame face down on the mantel and walked out of the room. It stayed face down the rest of the evening. No one flipped it back up. 6 months later, Mitchell got promoted. He threw a party at a rooftop bar in uptown Charlotte. Vanessa introduced Carlos to one of Mitchell's colleagues as Donna's friend. Carlos corrected her, husband, actually. Vanessa laughed it off like he'd made a joke. After dinner, Mitchell pulled me aside near the bar. The bass from the music vibrated through the floor. He leaned in, bourbon on his breath. "Can you ask Carlos not to talk about his work? It's embarrassing. People keep asking what he does and I don't know what to tell them." I didn't swallow it this time. "Mitchell, Carlos builds furniture people pay thousands of dollars for. What exactly should he be embarrassed about?" He blinked. Wasn't expecting pushback. Then the smirk returned, "Sure, Donna. Whatever helps you sleep at night." But 2 people nearby had heard me. And they didn't laugh. When I got pregnant with Sophia, I invited the whole family to the baby shower. Patricia sent a gift, a onesie in a department store box. The card read, "Wishing you all the best. Love, Mom." No mention of Carlos. No mention of becoming a grandmother. She didn't come. The day of the shower, I kept checking the driveway through the kitchen window. Every time a car pulled up, my chest tightened. 30 guests came, friends, co-workers, Carlos's mother and sister who drove 3 hours from Raleigh. The house was full and loud and happy. But the one seat I'd saved at the front, with a little handwritten place card that said, "Grandma," stayed empty the whole afternoon. Carlos's mother, Elena, saw me staring at it. She walked over, picked up the card, sat down, and squeezed my hand. "I'm here, Mija." I almost lost it right there. 2 months after Sophia was born, I saw it on my cousin's Facebook. Patricia had thrown a lavish, grandchild reveal party for Mitchell and Vanessa's baby. A balloon arch in pink and blue stretching across her living room. Catered finger sandwiches. 30 guests. A 3-tier cake with blue frosting that read, "Welcome baby Ashton." My daughter Sophia was 4 months old. No one had told me about the party. No one had even mentioned Mitchell was expecting. I scrolled through the photos, Patricia holding baby Ashton, beaming, looking like the proudest grandmother in the world. Then I looked at Sophia, asleep in her bassinet beside me. My mother had never held her. Not once. I closed the app and didn't open it again for a year. One night, this was about a year into our marriage, I came home and the workshop was dark. No lights, no music, no hum of the dust collector. Just silence. I pushed the door open and found Carlos sitting on an overturned milk crate, hands hanging between his knees, staring at the concrete floor. "I called Greenfield Landscaping this morning," he said without looking up. "About a full-time position. Mowing crews. Benefits. Steady work." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Maybe your mother's right." His voice was flat, emptied out. "Maybe I'm just a guy with a hobby who got lucky a couple times. I don't want to drag you down, Donna." I sat beside him on the cold concrete floor. Took his hand, the calloused, sawdust-creased hand my mother had looked at with disgust. "If you quit because of them, they win. And Carlos, they don't deserve to win." He didn't answer. But the next morning, the workshop lights were on at 5 a.m. He never mentioned quitting again. And he kept building. 3 years after that night on the milk crate, one of Carlos's dining tables sold for more than Mitchell's first real estate commission. I know because Mitchell bragged about that commission every Thanksgiving for a decade, $22,000. Carlos's table, a 12-foot slab of hand-joined black walnut, the grain running through it like a dark river, sold for 28. He didn't tell a soul except me. His workshop grew quietly, specialty wood deliveries arriving on pallets, a CNC machine he installed himself over a weekend, clients whose names I started recognizing from design magazines. One evening I walked into the shop and stopped in the doorway. Under the work light sat a dining table so beautiful it looked like it belonged in a museum. The walnut glowed. Every joint was invisible. "Who's that for?" I asked. "A designer in Asheville. She's paying $12,000. I stared. Carlos shrugged. "Wood's honest. People pay for honest things." But my family didn't know any of this. They still called him the yard guy. And what they were hiding was so much worse than what he was building. Over the next few years, things about Mitchell and Vanessa stopped adding up. Vanessa's interior design business had no website. No portfolio. No client testimonials. No before and after photos, no trade shows, no professional memberships. Nothing you'd expect from someone who claimed to be running a design firm. But her personal Instagram told a different story: marble countertops, champagne in crystal flutes, designer bags arranged on white shelves like museum exhibits. #designer life. #built not bought. The irony of that one would hit me later like a truck. But the spending was what didn't add up. A new BMW every year. A kitchen renovation that ran over $100,000. Trips to Turks and Caicos twice in 1 year. Vanessa's closet was a walk-in showroom of designer labels she'd photograph and post like evidence of a life well lived. Mitchell matched her, custom suits, a Rolex he made sure to mention was a gift to myself, a boat he docked at Lake Norman that he used maybe 3 times a year. Where was the money coming from? Vanessa's LLC had no visible revenue stream. Mitchell's real estate salary was good, but not that good. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my business. Until my college friend Terry called. Terry worked in compliance at a bank in Charlotte. We hadn't spoken in months. The call started casual. How's Sophia? How's the farm life? Then her voice shifted. Hey, random question. Is your brother still doing those property flips with Vanessa? I don't really know what Mitchell's doing these days. We don't talk much. Terry went quiet. Then, just, be careful, okay? Some names came up in a review at work. I legally can't say more than that. She paused. I just wanted you to hear it from a friend. She hung up. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, a cold feeling spreading from my stomach outward, like ice water spilling across a table. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her name on my phone screen for the first time in 14 months. I was standing in the kitchen, Sophia on my hip, stirring pasta with one hand. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it ring through to voicemail the way she'd let every one of my calls go for the past year. But something made me pick up. Donna. Patricia's voice was different. Not warm, not cold. Transactional, like a realtor calling about a closing. No, how are you? No, how's Sophia? No acknowledgement that she hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Just business. I need you to come to Charlotte. Mitchell's in trouble. Real trouble. I set Sophia in her high chair and stepped into the hallway. What kind of trouble? Financial. Legal. It's complicated, but the short version is we need $1.2 million in 3 weeks, or your brother could face prison time. The number landed like a physical weight. I leaned against the wall. And where exactly do you expect me to get $1.2 million? Patricia paused. And when she spoke, there wasn't a single shred of irony in her voice, not one flicker of awareness that what she was about to say was the most hypocritical sentence she'd ever uttered. Sell Carlos's little shop. The equipment, the inventory, whatever he's got stored in there. That should cover most of it. Carlos's little shop. The same work she'd spent 8 years dismissing, diminishing, and pretending didn't exist, reduced to 2 words and a dollar sign. The workshop where Carlos woke at 5 a.m. and worked until his hands ached. The place that smelled like cedar and ambition. She wanted it liquidated like a garage sale to clean up her golden child's mess. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told her I'd call back. Then I walked across the yard to the workshop, where Carlos was running a hand plane across a $15,000 commissioned bookcase for a client in Manhattan, walnut shavings curling off the blade and falling to the floor like ribbons. I told him everything. The call, the money, the desperation. What he said next changed the entire direction of this story. Carlos didn't react. He finished the pass with the plane, set it down on the bench, and wiped his hands on his canvas apron. The workshop was quiet except for the hum of the dust collector and the faint smell of linseed oil rising from the bookcase. I know about Mitchell, he said. I stopped breathing. 6 months earlier, Carlos explained, one of his biggest clients, a high-end interior designer in Charlotte, had mentioned a woman named Vanessa Hartley approaching designers across the region. Vanessa was offering discounted custom furniture, claiming it was locally handcrafted. The pieces were cheap overseas imports, but the designs were Carlos's. His exact proportions, his joinery style, his signature lines. Copied detail for detail. Carlos had hired a forensic accountant quietly. Without telling me, he'd spent 3 months following the money. What the accountant found was worse than knockoff furniture. Vanessa's LLC wasn't a real design business, it was a shell company. Mitchell was funneling off the books real estate commissions through it, skimming from deals his firm didn't know about. The knockoff furniture sales were how they laundered the cash. Every fake table, every imitation bookcase was a receipt for dirty money. The entire operation, Mitchell's hidden income, Vanessa's fake career, the lifestyle they flaunted on Instagram, was built on imitating the man they'd spent 8 years calling the yard guy. "There's something else," Carlos said. His voice dropped. "Something I didn't want to tell you until I was certain." He pulled a client list from the forensic report. Names and addresses, organized by purchase date. I scanned the column and felt the floor tilt under me. Margaret Caldwell. Nancy Chen. Ruth Abernathy. I knew every single name. These women had sat in my mother's living room every Saturday for years. Book club. Wine night. The inner circle Patricia had spent 30 years building. "These are Mom's friends," I whispered. "Half her book club bought from Vanessa." Carlos nodded slowly. "She wasn't just stealing from me. She was selling the fakes to the people your mother cares about most." Margaret paid $8,000 for a sideboard that cost $200 to import. Nancy paid $6 for a coffee table. They all think they own handmade originals. The twist wasn't just design theft. It wasn't just money laundering. Patricia's entire social world, the women she brunched with, golfed with, exchanged Christmas cards with, were sitting on knockoff furniture copied from the man Patricia called the yard guy. And when they found out, it wouldn't just embarrass Patricia. It would detonate the only thing she'd ever truly valued, her image. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Carlos was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't want you to choose between me and them. You already chose. I didn't need you to prove it." He opened a drawer in his workbench. Inside, a folder thick with financial records, side-by-side design comparisons, the forensic accountant's full report. "If you want to use this, it's yours. If you don't, we close this drawer and move on. Your call." Patricia's Christmas Eve dinner was 3 weeks away. 30 guests. Her finest performance of the year. And for the first time in 8 years, I actually wanted to attend. Quick pause. This channel collects real stories from real people and forums, and breaks down the psychology behind why families turn on their own. Why mothers choose image over love. Why brothers mock what they can't control. If you want to understand the why behind families like mine, subscribe and stay until the end. Because what happened at that Christmas Eve dinner, I still get chills telling it. Christmas Eve. 6:30 p.m. Patricia's house looked like it belonged on a postcard. A white colonial glowing with electric candles in every window, a wreath on each door, the front lawn dusted with frost that sparkled under the porch lights like scattered glass. Inside, a 10-foot tree stood in the foyer, professionally decorated, silver and gold, not a single ornament out of place. The dining room table was set for 30. Patricia's monogrammed china. Crystal wine glasses that caught the chandelier light and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. A string quartet in the living room played "Oh Holy Night." The air smelled like pine needles, roasted lamb, and expensive perfume. Carlos and I arrived at 7. He wore a simple navy blazer, no tie. I wore a black dress with pockets deep enough for a manila envelope. Patricia met us at the door. Her smile, the public one, the one she wore like armor. "Donna, darling." Air kiss, no contact. Then, Anne. "Carlos." She said his name the way you'd read it off a hospital intake form. Dinner was a performance, like everything in that house. Roasted lamb with rosemary, a winter salad with pomegranate seeds scattered across the plates like tiny rubies on white porcelain. Mitchell held court at the far end of the table, telling a story about a waterfront development deal, a deal I now knew was built on fraud. He spoke with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been caught, gesturing with his wine glass, commanding the room. Vanessa sat beside him in a gold bracelet that cost more than my car, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm, playing the adoring wife. Gene sat at the corner with his bourbon, quiet as furniture, staring at the grain of the tablecloth like he might find answers there. I ate slowly. Watched. The manila envelope sat in my lap under my napkin, heavy as a verdict. After dessert, a 3-layer red velvet cake Patricia had ordered from the most expensive bakery in Charlotte, she stood. tapped her champagne flute with a butter knife. The crystal rang out and the room went still. Thank you all for being here tonight. 60 years of Christmases, and this family keeps growing. Practiced warmth. 1,000-watt charity gala smile. Then her voice shifted. But tonight I also want to talk about what family really means. Supporting each other. Especially through difficult times. She looked directly at me. Every eye in the room followed hers. Mitchell and Vanessa are going through a challenging period. And I've asked Donna, my youngest, to help our family through it. A waiter appeared. Placed a leather folder in front of me. Inside, paperwork. A land sale agreement. Ready for my signature. It's very simple, Patricia continued. A small piece of property. A fair price. Just a signature, and we keep this family whole. 30 people waited. The trap was sprung, public pressure, social expectation, the assumption that I'd fold rather than cause a scene at Christmas dinner. I stood up. The chair legs scraped against the hardwood. Before I respond to that, I think everyone here deserves to know what Mitchell's challenging period actually looks like. I opened the envelope. Pulled out the forensic report. Read the key findings. The Shell LLC registered in Gene's name without his full knowledge. The off-the-books commissions funneled through Vanessa's fake interior design business. The knockoff furniture, Carlos's designs, copied and sold as handmade originals. Mitchell's face went the color of the tablecloth. Vanessa grabbed his arm. She's lying. I held up the side-by-side photographs. Carlos's original black walnut dining table on the left, every joint precise, the grain flowing unbroken across 12 feet. Vanessa's knockoff on the right, veneer over particle board, proportions slightly off, like a photocopy of a painting. My husband spent 8 years being called the yard guy by this family. And the whole time, Vanessa was stealing his designs and Mitchell was laundering money through the copies. I paused. Let the room absorb it. Then the part I'd been waiting for. And some of you in this room bought the fakes. Margaret Caldwell's hand went to her throat. That sideboard Vanessa sold me last spring. She told me it was handcrafted by a local artisan. Nancy Chin, 2 seats over, the coffee table. $8,000. She said it was one of a kind. Ruth Abernathy set her wine glass down without a word. Her silence said everything. Patricia's social circle, the women she'd spent 30 years cultivating, just learned they'd been sold counterfeits of the man Patricia had spent 8 years dismissing. By Patricia's own daughter-in-law. Mitchell stood, face flushed. This is Christmas Eve, Donna. You're embarrassing the family. Margaret turned to him, voice like a blade. No, Mitchell. You embarrassed the family. We just didn't know it until now. And then Carlos stood up. And what he said made my mother's champagne glass hit the floor. Carlos didn't raise his voice. He never did. He stood slowly, buttoned his blazer, the way you do when you want people to listen, not because you're nervous but because what you're about to say deserves the posture. The room contracted around him. Even the candle flames seemed to hold still. Mrs. Hartley. He looked directly at Patricia. His voice carried the way a cello carries, low, steady, impossible to ignore. You asked Donna to sell my shop to cover your son's crimes. He let the word sit. Crimes. That shop, the work you spent 8 years calling a hobby, has a 6-month waiting list. It was featured in Architectural Digest last spring. I have clients in 12 states. And the company is worth more than everything Mitchell has earned in his entire career. Combined. The room didn't gasp. It was worse than that. It went so quiet I could hear the wax dripping from the taper candles on the centerpiece. Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, crystal fragments scattering across the dark wood, catching the Christmas tree lights like tiny fallen stars. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Nobody moved to clean it up. The champagne pooled between the shards, soaking into the rug Patricia had bought in Italy. Mitchell stepped forward, jaw clenched, face red. "You're a landscaper. You cut grass for a living." "I haven't cut grass in 5 years." Carlos's voice didn't waver. Not a crack, not a tremor. "I build furniture for people who can tell the difference between craftsmanship and a knockoff. And 3 of those people are sitting at this table right now. Ask them which one they'd rather own." Vanessa cracked first. She turned on Mitchell, mascara already streaking down her cheeks in dark lines. "You told me no one would find out. You said it was safe. You promised, Mitchell." Then Gene stood. His chair scraped against the hardwood and every head turned, because Gene Hartley had not stood up at a family gathering to speak in anyone's living memory. He was trembling, his whole frame shaking, the bourbon in his glass sloshing against the sides. His wire-rimmed glasses had slid down his nose and he didn't push them back. He looked at Mitchell. Not at Patricia. At his son. "You told me those LLC papers were a legitimate investment. You needed my name, my signature, my social security number. And I gave it to you because you're my son and I trusted you." His voice cracked on the last word like a branch giving way. "You used me." The quiet man. Finally not quiet. 30 years of nodding, and he chose this moment to stop. Margaret Caldwell spoke from her end of the table, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Vanessa, I want a refund. That sideboard you sold me for $8,000 is apparently worth about $200. I showed it off to everyone at my anniversary party. You let me believe it was handcrafted." Nancy Chen set down her fork. "The coffee table in my living room. You told me it was a one-of-a-kind commission." Someone pulled out their phone. Found the Architectural Digest feature on Carlos. "Read aloud to the table, Medina Woodworks, Master Craftsman Carlos Medina, clients across the eastern seaboard, 6-month waiting list, pieces starting at $10,000. The phone got passed hand to hand around the table. I watched faces change, confusion dissolving into disbelief, disbelief sharpening into something like awe. The man they'd been pitying for 8 years had built something none of them could touch. Mitchell grabbed his coat from the back of his chair. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice had nothing left in it, no authority, no charm, just a hollow man making a hollow threat. He shoved through the dining room toward the front door. It slammed so hard a gold ornament dropped from the 10-foot tree and shattered on the tile floor, gold glass joining the champagne crystal already glittering at Patricia's feet. 2 kinds of broken glass. 1 kind of silence. Patricia stood alone at the head of her Christmas table. Her monogrammed napkin still folded in her hand. 30 people seeing her clearly for the first time. No one defended her. No one reached for her hand. No one said, "There must be a misunderstanding." The string quartet had stopped playing minutes ago. The only sound was the furnace humming and the candle flames guttering in the draft from the slammed door. That was the last Christmas I ever spent in my mother's house. But it wasn't the last time she called. Things moved fast after that night. Mitchell took a plea deal, 2 years probation, full restitution, lost his real estate license permanently. Vanessa's LLC was shut down by court order. Margaret, Nancy, and Ruth filed civil claims for the knockoff furniture, Margaret's sideboard, Nancy's coffee table, Ruth's dining console. The refund hearings were quick. The evidence was overwhelming. Mitchell and Vanessa divorced within 6 months. I heard she moved back to her parents' place in Virginia. I never confirmed it. Didn't need to. Patricia's book club, the one she'd spent 20 years curating, every Saturday, same women, same wine, same living room, dissolved in a single week. One by one, the women stopped calling. Margaret sent a 2-sentence email: "I trusted your family. I won't make that mistake again." Patricia didn't respond. What could she say? She sold the Charlotte house. The staged rooms, the seasonal throw pillows, the monogrammed napkins, all packed into moving boxes and hauled to a 2-bedroom townhouse in Raleigh. I drove past the Charlotte place once, months later. The new owners had painted it gray. The hedges Patricia kept trimmed to military precision were already growing wild. The H monogram doormat was gone. She didn't call me for 6 months. I didn't call her either. Then one evening in June, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a Raleigh number. I almost deleted it. Something made me press play. Patricia's voice, but not the voice I knew. Not commanding. Not transactional. Not performing. Just a 61-year-old woman, alone in a smaller house, sounding tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. Donna. It's your mother. A long pause. I could hear her breathing. I was wrong about him. About Carlos. I'm not ready to say much else yet. But I was wrong. That's all I called to say. Another pause. I hope Sophia's doing well. Click. Not an apology. Not a request. Just 6 words that Patricia Hartley had probably never said in sequence before. I was wrong about him. The closest she'd ever come to honesty. I've listened to that voicemail 11 times. I haven't called her back. Not yet. But I haven't deleted it either. Gene surprised me most of all. He started calling every Sunday. Short calls at first, awkward and halting, full of long silences. How's Sophia? How's the weather up there? Carlos keeping busy? He never mentioned Patricia, never mentioned Mitchell, never tried to play mediator. He just called. Week after week. Consistent for the first time in his life. And then he drove up for Sophia's 4th birthday. I watched this stiff, quiet man in his pressed khakis lower himself onto the living room carpet, cross his legs with a grunt, and let a 4-year-old put a plastic tiara on his head. A pink tiara with fake jewels. Gene Hartley, the man who'd spent 35 years disappearing into the background, sat on that carpet for 2 hours. He played Tea Party. He made up voices for stuffed animals. He let Sophia paint his fingernails purple. And he laughed, a real laugh, loose and unguarded, a sound I'd never heard from him in my entire childhood. I stood in the kitchen doorway and cried. Not from sadness. Not from anger. From watching the father I'd always wanted finally decide to show up. Late, imperfect, with purple fingernails and a plastic tiara, but present. For the first time, present. Mitchell hasn't spoken to me since Christmas Eve. Some doors don't reopen. And not all of them should. Looking back now, at 31, I understand something about my mother and my brother that I couldn't see at 23. People like Patricia and Mitchell don't look down on others because they truly believe they're superior. They do it because they need to. Their whole sense of who they are depends on being above someone. Carlos threatened that just by existing, he was happy without their approval, successful outside their world. And that terrified them. Because if someone could build a beautiful life without their value system, it meant their value system was never worth much to begin with. And here's the other thing I've learned, the thing I wish someone had told me 8 years ago. Families that run on image don't just punish the person who leaves. They punish anyone who proves that leaving was the right choice. Every table Carlos built with his hands, every time I laughed in my own kitchen with Sophia on my hip, it was proof that they were wrong. And people like Patricia don't hear "I was wrong" as a chance to grow. They hear it as a threat. That's why she never came to Sophia's baby shower. Not because she didn't care. Because caring would have meant admitting she'd been cruel, and she wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. Not yet. Carlos's company kept growing. He hired 6 craftsmen. Moved into a proper workshop with 16-foot ceilings and natural light. He still wears the same boots he wore the day I met him at the garden center, the ones my mother looked at like they were covered in something foul. Sophia is 7 now. She knows how to use a hand plane under his supervision, her small hands over his, shavings falling around them both. There's a photo on our fridge. Not a family portrait, nothing staged, nothing performed. Just Carlos and Sophia in the workshop, late afternoon, sawdust floating in the golden light like something holy. They're both laughing. Behind them, a half-finished rocking chair waits on the bench. That photo is worth more than anything Patricia ever hung on her mantel. If you've ever been the one your family counted out, the one who married wrong, chose wrong, lived wrong by their standards, I want you to know something. You weren't wrong. You were just early. And the people who mocked you will either catch up, or they won't. Either way, your life is not a waiting room for their approval. All stories on this channel are collected from real forums and modified for privacy. If this one reached you, hit subscribe. Check the description for the next video. And remember, the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so real they can't pretend it doesn't exist.